A wounded Comanche collapses at the gate of a U.S. Army fort, bleeding, hunted, and half dead. The only white officer on site must make a decision that could save a life, or cost him everything. But what he uncovers next will change how he sees war, his country, and himself. Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked this story, and where you're watching from and why you're following this. The scorching Texas sun beat down mercilessly on Fort Davis as Lieutenant James Harrington wiped sweat from his brow. It was the summer of 1872, and the military outpost stood as a lonely sentinel in Comanche territory. The wooden structures of the fort creaked in the heat, dust devils swirling across the parade ground as soldiers went about their daily duties. Harrington had been stationed at this desolate outpost for 6 months now, the only white officer among a company of buffalo soldiers, the black cavalry troops who patrolled these dangerous borderlands. The men under his command respected him, though they kept a certain distance, not because of his rank, but because of the unspoken racial tensions that permeated even this isolated place. "Lieutenant, the patrol's returned," called Sergeant Augustus Freeman, a tall, imposing figure who had fought with distinction during the Civil War. "Spotted some Comanche movement near Olympia Creek." Harrington nodded, squinting toward the horizon. "Any trouble?" "No, sir, just tracks. Maybe 5 riders headed east." Freeman's dark eyes held concern. "Captain Williams wants us to follow at first light." That evening, as the fort settled into uneasy quiet, Harrington sat alone in his sparse quarters, writing in his journal by lamplight. The son of Boston abolitionists, he'd joined the army to prove himself, but the frontier had tested him in ways he never imagined. He wrote of his growing respect for the Buffalo Soldiers, men who fought with courage despite serving a country that denied them basic rights. And he wrote of his conflicted feelings about their mission, pushing native peoples from their ancestral lands. A sudden commotion outside broke his concentration. Shouts echoed across the parade ground. Harrington grabbed his revolver and stepped outside into the moonlit night. Several soldiers were gathered near the stables, pointing toward the eastern perimeter. "What's happening?" Harrington demanded. Corporal Jenkins turned, his expression tense. "Someone's approaching, sir. Single rider, coming fast." Harrington followed. His gaze, a lone figure on horseback, was galloping toward the fort, silhouetted against the silver landscape. As the rider drew closer, Harrington could see he was hunched over, barely staying in the saddle. "Hold your fire," Harrington ordered as several rifles raised instinctively. The horse stumbled to a halt at the gate, and its rider slid from the saddle, collapsing in the dirt. Harrington rushed forward, then stopped short. Lying before him was a young Comanche warrior, no more than 20 years old, bleeding profusely from a wound in his side. "Sir, it's one of them savages," a soldier muttered, raising his rifle again. "Lower." "That weapon, Private," Harrington snapped. He knelt beside the wounded man, who looked up with pain-filled eyes. "White ... soldiers." The Comanche managed in broken English before losing consciousness. Sergeant Freeman approached, his face grim. "Lieutenant, Captain Williams gave standing orders. Any hostile natives are to be detained and questioned." Harrington met Freeman's gaze. "This man needs medical attention, Sergeant." "Sir, with respect, helping a Comanche could be seen as treason. Williams will have you court-martialed." Harrington knew Freeman was right. Captain Williams, who was away inspecting another outpost, was known for his hatred of the Comanche. But something in the young warrior's desperate flight to an enemy fort told Harrington there was more to the story. "Help me get him to my quarters," Harrington said quietly. Freeman hesitated, then nodded. "The men won't like this, sir. I'll deal with the men. And with Williams when he returns." As they carried the unconscious warrior to Harrington's quarters, the lieutenant could feel the stares of the Buffalo Soldiers. He understood their resentment. These men had fought and bled for a country that considered them less than full citizens. Yet here was their white officer risking everything for an enemy. Once inside, Harrington examined the wound more carefully. "He's been shot with an army rifle." He looked up at Freeman. Why would a Comanche ride to an army fort for help after being shot by soldiers? Freeman's expression darkened. Unless they weren't regular army. The implication hung heavy in the air. Both men knew of the unofficial raids conducted by civilian militias against native encampments, massacres that the army officially condemned but tacitly allowed. "We need to keep him hidden until we know more," Harrington decided. "If I'm wrong, I'll face the consequences alone." Freeman nodded slowly. "I'll bring bandages and medicines, but sir, you're not alone in this." As Freeman left, Harrington looked down at the wounded Comanche, wondering what chain of events he had just set in motion, and whether his decision would cost him his career or perhaps even his life. The Comanche warrior regained consciousness shortly before dawn, his dark eyes snapping open with alarm. He immediately tried to rise, only to fall back with a groan of pain. "Easy," Harrington said, keeping his voice low. "You're safe for now." The young man's gaze darted around the small room, taking in the military furnishings before settling warily on Harrington. His hand instinctively reached for a weapon that wasn't there. "My name is Lieutenant James Harrington," he said, speaking slowly. "You came to our fort. You're wounded." The Comanche studied him silently for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his English was halting but clear. "I am Quahati. My name ... Tashaway." "Tashaway," Harrington repeated. "Can you tell me what happened to you?" The warrior's face hardened. "White men, not soldiers, no uniforms. They attack our camp," his voice caught. "Many dead, women, children." Harrington felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. Civilian raiders, just as he'd feared. "Where?" 3 days' ride, near Palo Duro." Tashaway winced as he shifted. "I ride to warn other camps. Men follow. Shoot me." A soft knock at the door made them both tense. Harrington moved quickly, placing his hand on Tashaway's shoulder in warning before opening the door a crack. Sergeant Freeman stood outside with a bundle of supplies. "Captain Williams is returning early," Freeman said quietly. "Ryder just brought word. He'll be here by midday." Harrington cursed under his breath. "Thank you, Sergeant." As Freeman departed, Harrington turned back to find Tashaway watching him intently. "Why you help me, Bluecoat?" The Comanche asked Dot. It was a fair question. Harrington pulled up a chair and sat, choosing his words carefully. "My father taught me that a man's worth isn't determined by the color of his skin or the tribe he belongs to. What those raiders did, if what you say is true, was murder, not war." Tashaway seemed to consider this. "Your chief, this captain, he will not agree?" "No," Harrington admitted. "He won't." Outside, the fort was coming to life as soldiers began their morning duties. Harrington knew he couldn't keep Tashaway hidden for long. He needed allies. Later that morning, Harrington gathered those he trusted most: Sergeant Freeman, Corporal Jenkins, and Private Washington, a former slave with skilled hands who served as the company's unofficial medic. "What I'm about to ask of you could end all our careers," Harrington began, looking each man in the eye. "But I believe it's the right thing to do." Private Washington examined Tashaway's wound carefully. "He's lucky. Bullet went clean through. With proper care, he should recover." "The captain returns today," Freeman reminded them. "How do you propose? We hide a Comanche warrior in a fort this size?" "We don't," Harrington replied. "I'm going to take him out of here before Williams arrives." The room fell silent. It was Corporal Jenkins who finally spoke. "Sir, that's desertion." "Not if I return," Harrington countered. "I just need time to get Tashaway to safety and investigate his claims. If he's telling the truth about the raid, the army needs to know." Freeman shook his head. And if he's lying? If this is some Comanche trick? Harrington looked at Toshaway, who met his gaze steadily. Then I've risked everything for nothing. But my gut tells me he's telling the truth. The men exchanged glances. A silent communication born of shared hardships. Finally, Freeman spoke. The supply wagon leaves in an hour. It's your best chance to get past the sentries. I'm going with you, Washington declared unexpectedly. When Harrington began to protest, the private held up his hand. With respect, Lieutenant, that wound needs tending, and you can't do it alone. An hour later, Toshaway lay hidden beneath canvas in the back of the supply wagon, with Washington beside him posing as a driver's assistant. Harrington, mounted on his horse alongside, nodded to the gate guards as they passed through. Just escorting supplies to the trading post, Corporal, he explained casually. Should be back by evening. As they left the fort behind, Harrington couldn't shake the feeling that he was crossing a line from which there would be no return. Beside him, Washington sat rigid with tension. You didn't have to come, Harrington said quietly. Washington's dark eyes remained fixed on the horizon. My grandmother was Cherokee, Lieutenant. Walked the Trail of Tears as a child, he paused. Some wounds go deeper than bullets. They traveled in silence after that, following the rutted trail that led away from Fort Davis. Behind them, dust rose from a distant group of riders approaching the fort from the south. Captain Williams and his escort, returning earlier than expected. We need to move faster, Harrington urged, scanning the terrain ahead. He knew these lands well enough to recognize that they were vulnerable out in the open. They needed to reach the rocky canyons to the east, where they could find both cover and water. In the back of the wagon, Toshaway pushed himself up on one elbow, grimacing. Stop, he commanded. Washington looked alarmed. What is it? The Comanche warrior pointed to a distant ridge. Riders, not soldiers, the men who attacked my people. Harrington followed his gaze, squinting against the harsh sunlight. At first, he saw nothing. Then movement caught his eye. Horsemen, moving parallel to their course, partially hidden by the rolling terrain. How many? Harrington asked. 7, maybe 8, Toshaway replied. They hunt me. Harrington made a quick decision. We need to reach those canyons before they cut us off. Washington, can this wagon go any faster? The private nodded grimly, snapping the reins. As the wagon lurched forward, Harrington felt the weight of his decision growing heavier. He had committed himself now, not just to helping one wounded Comanche, but to potentially confronting the very men who had massacred an entire camp. And behind them, drawing ever closer to Fort Davis, was Captain Williams, a man who would consider Harrington's actions nothing short of treason. The supply wagon rattled violently as Washington urged the horses to their limits, dust billowing behind them as they raced toward the canyons. Harrington rode alongside, constantly scanning the terrain, acutely aware of the riders shadowing their movements from the ridge. They're trying to cut us off, Harrington called out, pointing to where the distant figures had changed direction, angling toward a narrow pass that served as the gateway to the canyon system. Washington nodded grimly. We won't make it before they do. In the back of the wagon, Toshaway pulled himself upright despite his wound. There is another way, he said, his voice strained. A hidden path. My people use it. Harrington reined in closer. Where? Toshaway pointed to a seemingly impassable section of the canyon wall, where a jumble of massive boulders created a natural barrier. Behind rocks, narrow path. Can the wagon make it through? The Comanche warrior shook his head. No wagon, only horses. Harrington made a swift calculation. They were still at least a mile from the canyon entrance, with the raiders closing in rapidly. Washington, unhitch one of the horses. We'll have to abandon the wagon. Working quickly, they freed one of the draft horses from its harness. Toshaway, despite Washington's protests, insisted on riding himself, refusing to show weakness. These men, Harrington asked as they prepared to make their break for the hidden path. "Why are they so determined to hunt you down?" Tashawe's expression darkened. "I know their faces. I can identify them." He touched a leather pouch hanging from his neck. "And I have proof of who pays them." Before Harrington could ask more, a rifle shot cracked through the air, the bullet kicking up dust near the wagon. "They've spotted us," Washington warned, already mounting the freed horse. "Go," Harrington commanded, helping Tashawe onto his own mount before swinging up behind him. They abandoned the wagon and galloped directly toward the boulder field, another volley of shots following them. The raiders, realizing their quarry was escaping, broke from their careful stalking and gave chase openly. 7 men, Harrington counted, all heavily armed and riding hard. "Who are they?" he shouted to Tashawe as they rode. "Bounty hunters," the Comanche replied. "Paid to kill my people, paid by men who want our land." They reached the boulder field with the raiders no more than 400 yards behind. Tashawe directed them to a narrow gap between 2 massive rocks that, from a distance, appeared to be a solid wall. The passage beyond was so tight they had to proceed in single file, Washington leading the way, followed by Harrington and Tashawe. The hidden path twisted through the canyon, sometimes barely wide enough for a horse to pass. Behind them, they could hear the raiders' frustrated shouts as they searched for the entrance. "They will find it eventually," Tashawe warned. "They have tracked my people before." The path led them deeper into the canyon system, opening occasionally into small hidden valleys before narrowing again. After nearly an hour of tense riding, they emerged into a secluded box canyon with a small spring feeding a pool of clear water. "We can rest the horses here," Harrington decided, helping Tashawe dismount. The Comanche warrior's side was bleeding again, the exertion of the ride having reopened his wound. As Washington tended to Tashawe, Harrington secured their horses and took stock of their situation. They had their sidearms, a rifle each, limited ammunition, and whatever supplies he had hastily grabbed from the wagon, enough food for perhaps 2 days. "Those men," Harrington said, returning to Tashawe's side. "You said they were paid." "By whom?" The Comanche reached for his leather pouch, withdrawing a folded document. "I take this from their leader's coat when they attack our camp. I understand little, but I know it is important." Harrington unfolded the paper carefully. It was a contract signed by a representative of the Texas and Pacific Railway Company, authorizing payment to secure and clear the proposed rail route of all Indian presence. At the bottom was a signature he recognized with a shot: Colonel Jeremy Barton, the regional military commander. "This is why you came to Fort Davis," Harrington realized. "You knew the Army was involved." Tashawe nodded grimly. "Not all blue coats. Just some. Big chiefs who take money from railroad men." Washington looked over Harrington's shoulder at the document. "This is proof of authorized massacres. If this got out, it would implicate the highest levels of the military command in this region," Harrington finished. "And explain why Captain Williams has been so aggressive toward the Comanche bands, specifically in the railroad's path." A distant shout echoed through the canyon, followed by the faint sound of hoofbeats. The raiders had found the hidden trail. "We need to move," Washington urged, already repacking his medical supplies. But Tashawe shook his head. "Too many passages ahead, easy to get lost. We must make stand here." Harrington assessed their position. The box canyon offered both advantages and risks. Its single entrance made it defensible, but also left them with no escape route if overwhelmed. "Washington, help me move those boulders," Harrington ordered, pointing to several large rocks that could provide cover. "We'll create a defensive position." As they worked, Harrington noticed Tashawe watching him with a curious expression. "You risk much, Bluecoat," the Comanche said. "Why?" Harrington paused, wiping sweat from his brow. "Because what's happening is wrong. And because staying silent makes me complicit." "Your people have fought mine for many seasons," Tashawe observed. "Yes," Harrington acknowledged. And there's blood on both sides, but massacring women and children for railroad profits? That's not war, that's murder. Washington, who had been arranging their weapons, looked up. Lieutenant, I've been thinking. Even if we survive this, what then? We're a WOO with a Comanche warrior. Captain Williams will have us shot. Not if we can get this evidence to someone who'll listen, Harrington replied, tapping the document. There are still honest men in the Army Command, and there are newspapers in San Antonio that would publish this. The sounds of approaching riders grew louder. Harrington estimated they had only minutes before the raiders found them. Get ready, he told his companions, checking his rifle one last time. Washington, you're the best shot. Take position behind that boulder. Tosh away, stay low, and conserve your strength. As they took their positions, Harrington felt a strange calm settle over him. Throughout his military career, he had followed orders, even when they troubled his conscience. Now, for the first time, he was acting solely on what he believed was right, regardless of the consequences. The first raider appeared at the canyon entrance, rifle ready. Harrington held his fire, waiting for more to show themselves. One by one, they entered the canyon cautiously, spreading out to present more difficult targets. That's far enough, Harrington called out. Drop your weapons. The lead rider, a weathered man with a scar running down his face, laughed harshly. Well now, what do we have here? A blue-belly lieutenant gone native? He spat on the ground. You're interfering with official business, soldier boy. Official business? Harrington replied, keeping his rifle steady. You mean murdering women and children for railroad money? The scarred man's eyes narrowed. You're making a big mistake, Lieutenant. Colonel Barton won't take kindly to one of his officers protecting savages. I have your contract, Harrington called back. Signed by Barton himself, authorizing the murder of innocent people for the Texas and Pacific. This revelation caused a stir among the raiders. The leader's face darkened with rage. Kill them all, he shouted, and find that paper. The canyon erupted in gunfire. The first volley of bullets ricocheted off the boulders, sending stone fragments flying. Harrington ducked lower, then raised his rifle and fired, striking one of the raiders in the shoulder. The man tumbled from his horse, screaming, Washington, true to his reputation as the company's best marksman, took careful aim and dropped another raider with a clean shot to the chest. 5 left, he called out. The remaining raiders scattered for cover, abandoning their horses to take positions behind rocks and crevices. A more methodical exchange of fire began, each side taking careful shots when targets presented themselves. Save your ammunition, Harrington warned. They're trying to wear us down. Toshaway, despite his wound, had managed to retrieve a fallen raider's rifle and was providing supporting fire. His face showed no pain, only grim determination. They will not rush us, the Comanche observed. They will wait for night. Harrington knew he was right. In darkness, the raiders' superior numbers would give them the advantage in close quarters. They needed to find a way out before sunset, still hours away. Is there another exit from this canyon? Harrington asked Toshaway. The Comanche nodded slightly. High up, narrow path along cliff, difficult climb. Harrington followed his gaze to a nearly invisible ledge about 50 feet up the canyon wall. It looked treacherous, but it might be their only chance. Washington, Harrington said quietly, we need to create a diversion. Keep their attention while Toshaway and I try for that ledge. The private nodded grimly. I'll make them think all 3 of us are still here. A bullet struck dangerously close, showering Harrington with stone. Dust. The raiders were becoming more aggressive, working to outflank their position. Lieutenant, Washington said suddenly, his voice low and urgent. Look! On the ridge above the canyon entrance, silhouetted against the afternoon sky, were horsemen, at least a dozen of them. For a moment, Harrington's heart sank, thinking. The raiders had received reinforcements. Then he saw the distinctive blue uniforms of cavalry troops. "It's Freeman," Harrington breathed, recognizing the sergeant's tall figure at the head of the patrol. He followed us. The raiders spotted the soldiers at the same moment. Their leader shouted orders, and they began firing upward at the new threat. The cavalry responded immediately, returning fire from their elevated position. Caught in a crossfire, the raiders were quickly overwhelmed. Within minutes, the shooting had stopped, and Sergeant Freeman was leading his men down into the canyon. Harrington emerged from cover cautiously, hands visible. "Sergeant Freeman," he called out, "we have wounded here." Freeman dismounted, approaching with his rifle lowered, but ready. His expression was unreadable as he surveyed the scene. "Harrington, Washington, and the wounded Comanche warrior." "Lieutenant Harrington," Freeman said formally, "Captain Williams ordered me to find you and bring you back for court-martial." He paused, then added more quietly, "He was quite specific about bringing you back alive to face military justice." Harrington nodded, understanding the implicit message. "And these men?" he asked, indicating the dead and wounded raiders. "Civilian casualties in our pursuit of a deserting officer," Freeman replied evenly. "Nothing more in my report." Washington stepped forward. "Sergeant, we have evidence. These men were hired by railroad interests with Colonel Barton's approval to massacre Comanche camps." Freeman's expression hardened. "Those are serious accusations, Private." "We have proof," Harrington said, producing the contract from his pocket. "Their leader admitted everything before attacking us." Freeman studied the document carefully, his face revealing nothing. Finally, he looked up. "Two of my men are the sons of newspaper publishers. One in San Antonio, one in Washington itself." A faint smile crossed his face. Information has a way of finding its proper audience. Relief washed over Harrington. "Thank you, Sergeant." "Don't thank me yet, Lieutenant. We still have to get back to Fort Davis, and Captain Williams is waiting." Freeman glanced at Tashaway. "And we have a wounded prisoner to transport." The journey back to Fort Davis was conducted in tense silence. Tashaway rode double with one of the Buffalo soldiers, his wound rebandaged but clearly causing him pain. Harrington and Washington rode under the watchful eyes of Freeman's men, their status ambiguous, neither prisoners nor comrades. As they approached the fort, Harrington could see Captain Williams waiting at the gate, his face contorted with rage. "Lieutenant Harrington," Williams bellowed as they rode in, "you are under arrest for desertion, dereliction of duty, and aiding the enemy." Freeman dismounted smoothly, saluting. "Captain Williams, sir. We encountered Lieutenant Harrington while in pursuit of hostile elements. He was engaged in gathering intelligence on civilian contractors operating illegally in Army territory." Williams' face purpled. "What are you talking about, Sergeant?" He abandoned his post. "With respect, sir," Freeman continued calmly, "Lieutenant, Harrington uncovered evidence of civilian mercenaries conducting unauthorized operations against Comanche settlements. He handed over the contract, including written authorization from Colonel Barton himself." Williams snatched the paper, his eyes widening as he read it. This is forgery," he sputtered. "It has to be." The mercenaries' leader confirmed. "Its authenticity before attempting to kill an Army officer," Freeman replied. "We have multiple witnesses, sir." Williams looked around wildly, suddenly aware of the many eyes watching this confrontation. Not just Freeman's patrol, but the entire garrison had gathered. Among them, Harrington noticed, were the two soldiers Freeman had mentioned, sons of newspaper publishers, taking in every word. "This matter requires further investigation," Williams said finally, his voice losing its certainty. "Lieutenant Harrington will remain under house arrest until we receive instructions from Regional Command." As the captain retreated to his office with the damning document, Harrington turned to Freeman. "What happens now?" "Now we wait," the sergeant replied. "And we make sure copies of that contract reach the right people." He nodded toward the two soldier journalists. The army may try to bury this, but the public won't stand for massacres being conducted in their name, not even against Comanche. Later, that evening, confined to his quarters, Harrington received an unexpected visitor. Sergeant Freeman entered, followed by Toshaway, who moved stiffly but with determination. "The Comanche insisted on speaking with you," Freeman explained. "I thought it best to allow it before he's transferred to the Indian Agency tomorrow." Toshaway approached Harrington, standing tall despite his injury. "Blue coat," he said formally. "You risk your life for one who should be enemy." "My people will know of this," Harrington nodded. "I did what any honorable man should do." "Honor," Toshaway repeated, as if testing the word. "Among my people, a life saved creates a bond. I owe you blood debt." "You owe me nothing," Harrington replied. "Just tell your people that not all whites seek their destruction. Some of us want peace." Toshaway reached into his pouch and removed a small carved stone eagle. "Take this. It marks you as friend to Quahati Comanche." As Harrington accepted the token, Freeman cleared his throat. Telegraph came in from division headquarters. "Colonel Barton has been relieved pending investigation. Captain Williams has been ordered to Fort Leavenworth to explain his knowledge of the unauthorized operations." "And me?" Harrington asked. "You've been assigned as liaison to the Indian Agency," Freeman said, with a hint of a smile. "Apparently someone thinks you have a talent for cross-cultural communication." 3 months later, Lieutenant James Harrington stood on a hill overlooking a Comanche encampment where representatives from several bands had gathered to discuss a new peace initiative. Beside him stood Sergeant Freeman, recently promoted, and Washington, now a corporal. In the valley below, Toshaway moved among his people, occasionally glancing up toward the soldiers. The massacre had not been forgotten, but neither had Harrington's actions. Small steps toward understanding had been taken. "Do you think it will last?" Freeman asked. "This peace?" Harrington watched as children played in the camp, women prepared food, and warriors sat in council. "I don't know," he admitted. "But for the first time, I believe it's possible." He fingered the carved eagle he now wore around his neck. One man's choice, made in a moment of crisis, had altered the course of many lives. It was a small victory in a long history of conflict, but perhaps, Harrington thought, it was these small victories that eventually led to greater ones. "We should go down," he said finally. "They're waiting for us." As they descended toward the encampment, Harrington felt the weight of both worlds on his shoulders, the military culture he had been born to and the native one he had come to respect. The path between them was narrow and treacherous, but he was determined to walk it, for in that space between worlds, understanding might finally take root and grow.